This is Jilly. I'm so happy to welcome you to our How the Pros Build Emails training. We had a more in-depth training on Twig in December. This is our in-depth training for the mailer, and we're going to be starting a series of these with analytics next on March 3rd. So stay tuned for that. This is an effort not only to explain, how the tools work and how to get more out of them, but more so why. What is the strategic implications? How can we make your program better? And how can you get more out of the tools and their functionality? So I'm really excited about this in-depth series. And if you have ideas for more trainings, please reach out to me. With that, we're going to start with a couple of introductions. So I'm going to go first. My name is Jilly. You've heard from me probably a number of times now, but I'm so excited to be here today and to be facilitating this. As I mentioned, I'm heading up our community efforts around the thousands of tools practitioners that we have, including you all and many more, and in an effort to really not only give you more empowerment and training around the tools and their features, but also introduce you to one another, help build your network, and help build your practice as digital practitioners. So I also want to make a plug right now for our series of community events that we're hosting across the East Coast in Oakland and London. If you're in Boston, New York, DC, and other cities, we're going to be coming to you, or rather hosting you in our offices. We want to meet you. I want you to meet more of the team, and I want you all to meet each other. So stay tuned for that, and if you haven't heard from me, you will. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Seth, whom you all probably know as well.
Hello, just very briefly, my name is Seth Resnick, Senior Vice President of Client Services. So my team and I run the normal weekly new admin trainings. As Julie said, we are going to be doing more of these fully in-depth things. And without further ado, I think we can turn it over to Natika here.
Hi, I'm Natika. I'm the Communications Associate at Blue State Digital, also known as the Email Nerd. I've been with BSD for 2.5 years, working on clients from NAACP to the U.S. Olympic Committee. Been building emails in both the tools and Convio for over 5 years with nonprofits, both in-house and, of course, here at BSD.
All right. Just a few housekeeping notes. First, this is being recorded, and if you have questions, there's a little Q&A module in the top left corner of your screen, so please ask them there, and I'll either type in and answer the question, or we'll answer it live. Keep the questions coming even after this training. If you've seen something that you want to follow up on, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we're going to be mentioning some documentation here, namely a checklist example that would be great for everyone to have. So I'll be sending that out as well as the recording after this call.
All right, so let's get started. So first of all, whenever you're going to send an email, it's really important to get your shit in order, as we might say. And that includes a lot of planning. So the first thing that really brings us a lot of peace of mind here is creating a calendar. So creating that calendar could be as simple as a Google Doc or as complicated as a big presentation or deck. But either way, the idea is that you'll plan out your emails to the most detail you possibly can, which means planning the date, the message, the testing, who the recipients are, and anything else that you might need to know before you get to the mailer. Even when they're rapid response, you want to at least write down whatever you need to get that mailing to the people you want to get it to and saying the right things that you need to say. So right before you get into the mailer, I would suggest that you review all of your calendar items and make sure that there haven't been any major changes that will derail you. So let's assume that you've looked at all of your details and everything's great, and then we are going to go forward into the mailer. So this is an example of a calendar that I created for NAACP towards the end of the year fundraising. This just tells me everything I need to know, from the sender to the segments, what kind of ask we're making, a little bit about the goal that we set, everything that I needed to know to sit down and draft an email, and then also everything I needed to know to send it out to the proper audience. So drafting that email using good habits means get approval on the email before you even get into the mailer. We really love Google Docs because it allows you to put everything into one document, including all the comments, all the edits. You can see everything that everybody agrees with or disagrees with, and you don't mess with Word. Microsoft Word does not work very well for gathering feedback, and I've seen it lead to typos and copy-paste errors and all kinds of nonsense that you don't want in your mailing when it gets to all of your hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So make sure that you have every single person's approval who matters on your team before you start going into the mailer. And also, you want to make sure that you've gathered all of your assets. That means any links, landing pages, donation forms, and also graphics before you actually start building anything in the mailer. And this is an example of an editing process that you might go through with Google Docs. This is actually a preview of the email that you're about to see me load. And with that, let's start building an email. So here's a little preview of what I'm going to cover. Creating mailing names, source codes, setting the recipients to your own email as a safety precaution, entering the subject and sender, and then I'm going to be coding the email by hand in both HTML and plain text. We're not going to cover number 6, building pages, with this training, but that's to come soon. We're also going to enter all the shortcut links, and then we're preview and sample. So that's everything that we're going to do before you would actually start quality assurance. So off to the mailer we go. So before we get into the mailer, this is what my draft looks like. It's very clean. We've got all of the comments resolved, all of the suggestions resolved. Everything sounds great. So we're into the mailer itself. So let's start with step 1, which is the basic information. So we have first up the mailing name. Here, I've listed the mailing name as 2016-01-29 BSD action sample. So we use the reverse date as the standard naming convention for all of our mailings. Just makes it a lot easier to sort and search for mailings by time sent, and it's just very, very helpful to have a naming convention in place. Next up, we have the mailing template, or what we might call the wrapper for an email. The wrapper or template is everything that remains unchanged from mailing to mailing. So the header and the footer, the unsubscribe information, all of that would fall under the template and is not what we'll be loading today. Description and tags can be useful. I'm not using them here, and I don't use them for the vast majority of my emails, but tags can be useful if you're trying to group a certain collection of emails together and preview them all, or otherwise categorize them by type. But campaign source code is a really important box here to fill out. It's extremely important for tracking. Without setting a unique source code here, you will not be able to track clicks against actions, and that helps you know who's coming to you with email and who's donating because of every individual email. That's why it's very important for this to be unique. You're also feeding data to your Google Analytics by adding this source code. So here you'll also see that it is the reverse date and a short description, and that's a very easy way to make sure that all of them are unique. If you're sending multiple emails in a day, you might add an A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3 to the end of them. If you have any test segments that you are running, you might want to add extra words there to indicate which test is which. But the reverse date plus description is a great way to get that unique source code. Next, we have recipients. So you'll see here that I have my own email address set as the recipient of this email, and that is because I'm paranoid. And I like to have the certainty that if this email randomly got sent, or I just went into a state and accidentally sent this email, the only person who would get it was me. And I won't embarrass myself or my clients by sending an email that's not ready yet. So that's just a quick tip on how to save yourself when you're building all these emails. Next up, we have the message itself. So this is all the stuff that your subscribers will be seeing. Here I have the sender. It's from Pug Thompson, or pugs@bluestatedigital.com. And you'll see that the reply to is also pugs@bluestatedigital.com. And it's important to make sure that the from and the reply to match. Otherwise, that can trigger some spam issues if all of those email addresses don't match up. And of course, we'll enter our subject line here according to the best practices of making it interesting and short, and whatever you think will catch the eye of your recipients best. I tend to load, when I'm loading the email, I tend to load the plain text first because it's the simplest thing you can possibly do. You'll see here I have added some code in here already. This language is Twig, and I'll talk about it a little bit more soon. But this is the typical way that we structure all of our plain text emails, paragraphs with 2 spaces between them, and adding the links wherever we think it's appropriate, plain text. But in the HTML, you'll see that I do not have the HTML editor turned on or the WYSIWYG turned on. I've truthfully never used the WYSIWYG. I truly prefer to load all of my emails by hand. And I code them by hand so that I can have more control over the result. You can think of the WYSIWYG as a sort of robot that can only act by the book. They see an image, there's a perfect way to code that. And if you want to center something, there's a particular way to code that. And when you put that all together, it might create an undesirable result that you might have to roll back and try all over again. But here, I have complete control over everything that happens. For example, a typical way to craft a paragraph is to use p tags or paragraph tags. But we've seen that certain email browsers do not play nicely with paragraph tags. So we use break tags instead, which I'm highlighting here. We use 2 break tags instead to create our paragraph breaks. The break tags are much more friendly and stable across browsers, and that is obviously very desirable for us. So it just makes it a lot easier to use these tags. Coding by hand also allows me to use Twig, which is a templating language. I'm just highlighting some Twig code right here. This snippet of code will populate a person's first name if we have it in our records, but if we don't have it in our records, it will just end the sentence after deadline. It's a little bit more powerful than the typical %% tags that you might be familiar with our personalization. And I believe we've done some trainings on Twig recently, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. But this is one of the very basic applications of Twig. Lower down in this email, I've used Twig again, and I've done it to add customized language. So you'll see here, if someone is in a cons group, a particular cons group, and I'm actually going to change the cons group that is, we will serve them 1 line of text. And if they are not in that cons group, I'll serve them another line of text. So we can preview the email here. And you'll see that I am a donor. So it says, we're so grateful for your generosity, but still please donate. But if I view this without personalized data, it'll just ask me to donate. So it says, we really need you with us tonight. It's critical for you to meet this goal, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a really quick customization that you'll be able to make when you start coding your emails by hand and you learn a little bit more about Twig and other templating languages that we use. So now the email is almost ready to go, but we do need to add an image. We have a little placeholder here. We want to make sure that our email looks beautiful. So in order to do that, I'll scroll up to your website and pick the library. I'll open in a new tab. And we'll click the upload files over here. Then we'll choose the file. I can find it quickly. Here it is. And start the upload. I've already uploaded it here, but I'll just replace it. Sometimes this takes a little longer than desired. Hope you guys aren't too bored by watching this. All right, so we have the file loaded up. And so a trick to make coding this a bit easier is to click on the file name, and this little pop-up window will open. And you'll see the adorable pug image that we've created for you guys today. And in this third box, you'll want to highlight everything that's featured in the box, copy it, and then paste it into your mailing where the graphic placeholder is. So you'll see here we have the image source, which is the path on your website to the image itself, the width, the height, and we have a blank space here for the alt. The image alt is the alternative text that someone would see if they do not have their images enabled. And the point of the image alt is to entice somebody to turn on their images or to just let them know what they're missing. So here, I'm gonna add an image alt of donate now to save a pug. And then I'm also gonna add another snippet of code to improve the way that the image appears. I'm gonna add border equals 0. That will prevent the email browser from adding an ugly blue border around the image since it's linked. Great, so it looks like our email is ready to go, but I'm gonna preview it one more time just to make sure it's looking exactly how I wanted it to. It's great, we have the image centered, it's linked, everything looks great to me. And just as a note, I centered this email not with a p tag that has a center aligned paragraph, but with the actual center tags here. Very simple to remember and very useful for images. Now, since the email looks great, the next thing we need to do is make sure that it's actually flawless. And so we have a little quality assurance process that we like to call checklisting. So moving back to this deck, this is a sample of a checklist that we have on the BSD blog. I wrote a blog post a few months ago about the importance of checklisting, which is our quality assurance process. Every single email that we send for our clients goes through the checklisting process. And the checklisting process is a series of questions that you hopefully ask another person, not yourself, if you are the one who has loaded the email. Ask another person to view the sample of the email and see whether the sender name is spelled correctly, whether the unsubscribe link is present, whether all of your copy is free of typos and just generally flawless. So you can see that blog post on our website, and you can also download the checklist there, but I also believe that Jilly will be sending some documentation around after this presentation. And we're gonna go back into the mailer really soon, because we're going to pretend that I've sent a sample to a colleague and they've looked through it and they've given me the go-ahead because everything is flawless. So once that's happened, it's time to actually set up our query or constituent groups and then get this ready to send to all of our recipients. Is the checklist that you'll get to once you've loaded up the constituents. So what I would have done is I would have loaded up a query for medium donors, and then I also would have restricted the zip code, for example, if I only wanted to hit people in DC. And I also would have excluded anyone who donated in January so that we didn't have any recent donors who got upset by getting this message, for example. But even though you didn't get to see that, this is still very useful. So once you've done all that, you've loaded up your constituent groups sending to the full list or whoever you've chosen, you want to make sure to take a pause on this page to make sure that everything is perfect. So you have your subject line, your from, and you want to make sure that that's all great. You can preview this email again, calculate the spam score to make sure that your message is really likely to get delivered to the people that you want to send it to. You can send additional sample messages to yourself or to others, and you can confirm the recipient count and your search criteria. Right now, it's still set to my email and people who have not donated this in January, but we'll move on to the next step. So I typically don't change these delivery order settings. I always use randomized sending. And for the send time, I pretty much never send anything immediately. Even if someone told me that I needed to send an email in the next 10 minutes, I would not send it immediately. I would just schedule it for 10 minutes from now and take a little bit of time to breathe, and also to do every last minute check I possibly could before I send this out to, up to 1 million people. So I would choose today's date and set it to send, let's say at 2:30 p.m. And you can also click this Prepare Now button. That would prepare the mailing list ahead of time, and that can speed up sending if you have a very large constituent group that you're sending to. In a lot of cases, this won't help if you are sending too close to the scheduling time. I don't think it would do much in 7 minutes, but if you are preparing something for the next day and you need to get it out to hundreds of thousands of people at a very specific time, it'll be really helpful and cut down on send times there. So I'm not actually going to send this email to myself, but that's how I would go through all of this process for my clients.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Atika. I'm going to mute you really quick, and then we're going to go to questions. For the constituent group setup, I know there were some questions about that in advance of the training, and we're actually going to do kind of a brief mini training on that. So stay tuned just to answer any questions about setting up the logic and the any and excludes and things like that. So I'll also send out some documentation on that, but we'll definitely cover that at a later time, and obviously happy to answer questions in the meantime. So with that, thank you, Natika. We're going to address some of the questions in the Q&A module, so I'll be bouncing back and forth here. Seth, this one's for you. So we talked about having the send and reply to emails matching, but sometimes you want to make the sender an executive director or someone who maybe doesn't want to receive all of the bounce backs that you get or out of offices. So what do you recommend for that?
Yeah, I think the solution here is actually really straightforward. Thankfully, would use the sender email address as a sort of generic email address, like a hello at or no reply at or something like that, which is a controlled inbox that you can log into, but obviously doesn't belong to the actual sender. In other words, like when Barack Obama sends a message, of course they use like info@barackobama.com or something along those lines. Similarly, actually, you don't need to fill out both of those fields. So if you just have your sender tied to a generic inbox, you don't even need to use the reply to, because it will by default use your sender email address.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. And follow up to that. So we've got a lot of questions about, responsiveness, and clearly this is a really important feature as more and more emails are being read on mobile. So how do you tackle responsive issues across browsers? What's your recommendation for images, font size, and things like that?
Responsive emails are thankfully a lot more straightforward than responsive web forms and such. Essentially, it's all about just setting sort of relative widths in your HTML and CSS. So tabled layouts, most emails are tabled layouts. And essentially what you would say is that the table has a maximum width of 100%, something like that. And then the table will scale based on how big the viewing area is, whether that's an iPad or a phone or whatever. Similarly, when you are doing your images, you also want to set that max width parameter. So instead of saying, oh, the image should be 600 pixels wide, what you'd actually want to say is, I want the image to be 50% max width or something like that. So it just sets up the way that the image can be loaded, and then will scale depending on the size that the email is rendered.
Great. And Neil had a question, if we can share an example of that code, and I think we could send some of that documentation after.
We can even send, and I think we have a generic responsive template that we can just send out a link to download. That's probably the best way to get started.
Great. All right, so along with formatting, do you recommend 2-column emails?
In general, no. basically because of what we kind of just talked about. You know, a lot of emails now are being read on of course, on mobile devices, and two-column emails become harder to read on those devices. I think our professional advice is keep the layout of the email as simple as humanly possible. If that's text, it's usually, you know, and we didn't get into so much content and styling. We do have a follow-up we're planning for that, but basically just a few paragraphs, less than probably 300 words, and an image. If it's an image-based email, you know, breaking that image up into 4 or 5 different messages, images, and, you know, having that display as a kind of one consecutive long banner or something like that. But in general, I would suggest against a two-column layout.
Awesome. All right. And a question about tracking here. So, you know, Natika showed how to include a link and an image and all that stuff. So how do you make sure, this is from B. Colette, how do you make sure that you can capture who clicks on that image so that you could send out maybe a more specific message to them after the fact?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So one of the things Natika highlighted was the source box. The way that works is that it will automatically add or append sourcing to all of your links. That's super great and really helpful for anything, you know, having to do with blue state sourcing or with Google Analytics sourcing. But what it could be problematic with is that it sets the same source for every single link. If you wanted to do something like that, like understand, well, is this link more profitable than this link or something like that, then what you could do is just set a source per link. So at the end of your link, you just add question mark source equals whatever, and then you could basically have source equals link 1, source equals image, or something like that. And then when you are looking at your donation stats later, you can filter by source to really get a good sense of what's what.
Great. And let's see, this is great. I love all the questions coming in. Back to some formatting. So do you have recommendations on how to increase the line height for your paragraphs in mobile or desktop?
You know, that may be some things that we have in that sample code, which you can take a look at. But, you know, also I think just some generic CSS for setting the line height is probably the best bet.
Yeah, and that would have in the template. All right, so this is a question about Natika's preference to use HTML coding instead of WYSIWYG. Is there a way you could maybe start on the WYSIWYG and then clean it up?
So yes, that's probably the way to do it. As Natika said, I think very eloquently, the WYSIWYG is a robot. I would add that it is sort of a little bit compulsive in that what it wants to do is basically clean up anything that is sort of left open or undone. So in other words, if, for example, you had like an open tag in your code, but there was a reason for that, the WYSIWYG would then close that out. Or you know, it might apply paragraph tags where you want to use break tags, because that is what it assumes is the way that you want to do it. So in lieu of that, you know, not using the WYSIWYG editor can be a little bit cleaner, but there is no inherent damage to using the editor.
Great. And for coding a newsletter, clearly these are a little bit more intensive in terms of the coding and images required. So is that just increase of code, or that's what Jim
in terms of making it responsive?
Code. Yeah.
I mean, that's just going to take a lot more complexity. Basically, the same rules apply, setting relative widths and whatnot. But you know, it is more complex. Obviously, when you have nested tables and such, that does increase the complexity of the situation. But I don't think, you know, it's impossible. It just requires a little bit more careful rendering too, because the behavior is a little bit different. Instead of just scaling, what it's going to do is actually you know, have to kind of place the different tables and such above each other, perhaps. So it does get a little more complicated.
But again, I think we err on the side of simplicity,
right,
for everything.
That being said, caveating that with what we said earlier, which is that yes, we do tend to err on the side of simplicity, both in terms of design and in terms of content. You know, it's like and this is a totally different topic, so we don't really want to get into it now. But the idea that you know, maybe issue areas are just or emails are focused on single issue areas, sort of thing.
Yeah. Hopefully a singular ask.
Right.
And there was a question to send some examples of good examples for newsletters and mobile. So we can also include maybe some of those as well after. In terms of unsubscribe, so Lyndon asked, do you have any documentation or resources on how to go from a global unsubscribe opt-out option to an opt-down option based on desired frequency of email or topics of interest?
Yeah, we do have some clients who do this. This is mainly custom. I think this isn't really something that we do in our agency organization because we sort of believe in the notion of a true opt-out and making it such that a person can remove themselves from the list if they want to remove themselves from the list. But the way that this is done by some people is kind of creating a web form that is submitted one of two ways. Either submits sort of a sign up that opts people into that quote less email group and potentially submits a call to our API, which would then unsubscribe the person if they chose to remain unsubscribed. So it does get a little bit more custom. So it's something to think about, but also it involves actual implementation steps where you're making sure that you are keeping your less email group out of your sending lists as often as possible.
Great. And then one final question for now, and then I'm going to include some more follow-ups. James is subscribed to BSD through the International Union, and so they have to include 2 different email addresses for their from and reply to. Do you have any recommendations on how to, if there isn't an option to have the same email address, to maybe alter?
I mean, I guess it's hard to know without understanding more about the specific need. It isn't a death sentence to use different email addresses in that way, but it does potentially increase the email browsers, the ESPs, view of the email as spam. So it's something to be mindful of, but nothing is a death sentence when it comes to spam. Spam marking and spam consideration by email service providers and domains is the combination of a lot of different things, including a recipient's previous behavior on an email or sort of what the people who you sent the email to have done. Have they clicked? Have they opened? Have they marked as spam? And so on. So no one thing will make something spam, but certainly that is an element of consideration.
Great. And James, we can definitely follow up with your specific question. So it seems like that is it in the Q&A module. I'm glad to give you back a little bit more of your Friday afternoon. So I'm going to be sending out checklists. I also included in the deck, there's an appendix that will follow that just has some BSD best practices to email in general in terms of how to structure one, what we've seen work. So I want to be sure that you have access to that as well. So that'll be in the deck. And we'll be sending the recording and then some of the sample code that I think will be really helpful, especially when we're being sure that your program is responsive and you're using best practices for HTML. So this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time here today and for everything that you're doing. And I hope to see you soon in one of our events coming to a city near you. So thanks everyone and take care.